October 2014. The salty breeze carried an unusual chill across Portland's eastern waterfront, where weathered fishing boats bobbed against their moorings like sleeping giants. 3 police cruisers and an unmarked detective sedan pulled into the gravel lot adjacent to the harbour master's office at precisely 6:47 a.m. Detective Sarah McKinnon was sipping her 3rd coffee of the morning when her radio crackled with news that would unravel a mystery that had haunted this tight-knit coastal community for over 5 decades. What began as a routine estate sale cleanup had transformed into the breakthrough that would finally bring justice to one of Maine's most enduring cold cases. The call had originated from Margaret Henley, an elderly woman tasked with clearing out her late uncle's cluttered waterfront cottage. While sorting through decades of accumulated maritime memorabilia, she discovered a leather-bound journal wedged behind a loose floorboard beneath the kitchen table. The diary, written in careful cursive script, contained entries spanning from January 1962 through December 1963. Most pages documented typical fisherman observations about weather patterns, catch quantities, and equipment repairs. However, the entries from November 1963 told a dramatically different story, one that would finally explain the disappearance of 23-year-old Catherine Marie O'Sullivan. If you're interested in true crime cases that mainstream media never fully explored, please hit that like button and subscribe, because we dive deep into the details that reveal the real story behind the headlines. Catherine Marie O'Sullivan was born on April 15, 1940, to Irish immigrants Patrick and Bridget O'Sullivan in Portland's working-class Munjoy Hill neighborhood. Standing 5 feet 7 inches tall with long, straight black hair that she typically wore in a neat braid down her back, Catherine possessed striking green eyes and a distinctive dimple in her left cheek that appeared whenever she smiled. Her slender frame moved with the confident grace of someone comfortable in their own skin, and she was known for wearing her grandmother's silver Celtic cross necklace, which never left her neck. Patrick O'Sullivan worked as a longshoreman at the Portland waterfront, earning steady wages loading and unloading cargo ships that arrived from ports across the Atlantic. Bridget supplemented the family income by taking in laundry from wealthier families in the West End. Catherine was the middle child of 5 siblings, with older brothers Michael and Thomas, and younger sisters Mary and Ruth. The O'Sullivan household was characterized by loud dinner conversations conducted in a mixture of English and Gaelic, Catholic devotion, and an unwavering belief that hard work would eventually lead to prosperity. Catherine was the brightest of all our children. Bridget O'Sullivan told the Portland Press-Herald in 1964, she could have been anything she wanted to be, a teacher or a nurse, maybe even a lawyer if times were different for women. Her high school teachers at Cathedral High School remembered Catherine as an exceptional student who consistently earned top marks in literature and mathematics. She harbored dreams of attending the University of Maine to study journalism, saving every penny from her part-time job at Porteous department store toward tuition costs. Catherine's personality was a compelling blend of ambition and compassion. Her youngest sister Ruth later recalled, "She would spend hours helping me with homework, even after working 8 hours at the store." Catherine believed education was the key to escaping poverty, but she never looked down on where we came from. Friends described her as fiercely loyal, quick-witted, and possessing an infectious laugh that could brighten even the dreariest Maine winter day. By November 1963, Catherine had established a routine that revolved around work, family obligations, and saving money for college. She worked Tuesday through Saturday at Porteous, spending Sundays at Mass with her family, and Monday evenings tutoring neighborhood children in reading and arithmetic. She was dating Robert Carey, a young man from a similar background who worked at the Bath Iron Works shipyard, though friends noted that Catherine seemed more focused on her future plans than settling down immediately. Portland in 1963 was a city caught between its maritime past and an uncertain industrial future. With a population of approximately 72,000, it served as Maine's economic hub, where generations of families had made their living from the sea. The waterfront district bustled with activity as fishing boats departed before dawn and returned with their catches by late afternoon. Irish, Italian, and French-Canadian immigrants had established distinct neighborhoods, each maintaining their cultural traditions while gradually assimilating into broader American society. The political climate was charged with the aftermath of President Kennedy's assassination just 2 weeks earlier, leaving the nation in a state of collective mourning and uncertainty. Locally, Portland was grappling with urban renewal projects that would eventually displace many working-class families from their traditional neighborhoods. The fishing industry, while still robust, faced increasing competition from larger commercial operations, creating economic anxiety among families like the O'Sullivans, who depended on maritime employment. Harbor View, the waterfront area where Catherine would last be seen, was a maze of piers, warehouses, and small businesses that catered to the fishing fleet. Restaurants like DeMillo's served fresh lobster and fish to both locals and the occasional tourist, while supply shops provided everything from rope and nets to engine parts and navigation equipment. The area had a reputation as rough but honest, where handshake deals were honored and everyone knew their neighbor's business. The community operated on unwritten codes of conduct. Fishermen looked out for one another's families when boats were at sea, women shared childcare responsibilities, and local shop owners extended credit during lean periods, with the understanding that debts would be honored when circumstances improved. This interconnected social fabric made Catherine's disappearance even more shocking because someone within this trusted network had betrayed the community's fundamental values. November 23, 1963, began as an ordinary Saturday for Catherine O'Sullivan. Her mother later reconstructed the timeline of her daughter's final day with painful precision. 7:15 a.m. Catherine left the family's apartment at 47 Waterville Street after sharing breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee with her father before his shift at the docks. She wore her navy blue wool coat, matching knit hat, and carried her small brown leather purse containing $17.43, her earnings from the previous week. 8:00 a.m. Catherine arrived at Portier's department store, where she worked in the women's clothing section. Co-worker Janet Morrison remembered Catherine seeming excited about something that morning, though she didn't elaborate on the source of her enthusiasm. 12:30 p.m. During her lunch break, Catherine was seen at Rhines Brothers cafeteria eating a bowl of clam chowder with Barbara Lynch, a friend from high school. Barbara later told investigators that Catherine mentioned receiving an interesting opportunity, but provided no additional details. 5:45 p.m. Catherine finished her shift and was observed walking down Exchange Street toward the waterfront area. Store manager Harold Peterson noted that she had declined a ride home from Robert Carey, explaining that she had an errand to run first. 6:20 p.m. Thomas Flanagan, who operated a bait shop near Pier 7, saw Catherine walking purposefully toward the eastern section of the waterfront, an area less frequented by evening foot traffic. 6:35 p.m. Mary Catherine Donnelly, who was closing her fish market, observed Catherine speaking with a man near the entrance to Wharf Street. Due to the early November darkness and distance, Donnelly could not identify the individual, but noted that the conversation appeared friendly rather than confrontational. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Catherine O'Sullivan alive. The following morning, when Catherine failed to appear for Sunday Mass, her family immediately sensed something was wrong. The O'Sullivans were devoutly Catholic, and Catherine had never missed Mass without prior family discussion. Patrick O'Sullivan spent Sunday morning searching the waterfront area, while Bridget contacted Catherine's friends and co-workers. By Sunday afternoon, the family had notified the Portland Police Department that their daughter was missing. The initial search focused on the waterfront district where Catherine was last seen. Officer Daniel McCarthy, who took the missing person report, later described the scene at Wharf Street as disturbing but not immediately conclusive. Catherine's brown leather purse was discovered partially hidden behind a stack of lobster traps, approximately 50 yards from where Mary Catherine Donnelly had observed the conversation the previous evening. The purse contained Catherine's identification, the $17.43 she had earned, and a small notebook where she recorded her savings progress toward college tuition. Notably absent was the silver Celtic cross necklace that Catherine wore daily, a detail that would prove significant decades later. The absence of robbery as a motive was immediately apparent, as cash and other valuables remained untouched. Detective Lieutenant Robert Hayes, who supervised the investigation, noted several unusual aspects of the crime scene. Fresh scrape marks on the wooden pier suggested that something heavy had been dragged across the surface. Several wooden crates had been moved from their usual positions, creating a secluded area invisible from the main waterfront thoroughfare. Most significantly, investigators discovered traces of blood on the edge of a concrete seawall, though forensic capabilities in 1963 limited the analysis to basic blood typing. The Portland Police Department's Marine Unit conducted extensive searches of Casco Bay for 5 consecutive days, employing boats equipped with grappling hooks and early diving equipment. Despite covering approximately 12 square miles of water, no trace of Catherine's body was recovered. The strong November currents and numerous underwater obstacles made the search particularly challenging, and officials acknowledged that remains might never surface, even if deposited in the bay. Community response was immediate and emotional. Everyone knew the O'Sullivan family, recalled longtime Harborview resident Anthony Torino in a 2010 interview. Catherine was one of those young people who gave you hope for the future. Her disappearance felt like an attack on all our children. Volunteer search parties organized by local churches and civic organizations combed the waterfront area for weeks following Catherine's disappearance, though no additional evidence was recovered. The investigation revealed the close-knit nature of the Harborview community, where residents could account for most people's movements and activities. This intimate knowledge initially appeared advantageous for investigators, as potential witnesses were readily available and cooperative. However, this same familiarity would later complicate the investigation when suspicion fell upon respected community members. Can you imagine living in a place where everyone knows everyone and suddenly realizing that someone you trust might be responsible for such a horrible crime? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because this kind of betrayal hits communities everywhere. The Portland Police Department in 1963 consisted of 47 officers serving a city of over 70,000 residents. Detective Lieutenant Robert Hayes led the Criminal Investigation Division with 3 additional detectives and limited resources compared to modern standards. Forensic capabilities were primitive by today's standards, restricted primarily to fingerprint analysis, basic blood typing, and photographic documentation of crime scenes. The investigation's initial phase focused on Catherine's immediate social circle, including family members, co-workers, and her boyfriend, Robert Carey. Carey, 25 years old and employed at Bath Iron Works, was thoroughly investigated due to his close relationship with Catherine. He had offered her a ride home on the evening of her disappearance, which she had declined. Carey's alibi was solid, verified by multiple co-workers who confirmed his presence at a union meeting that evening from 7:00 p.m. until nearly 10:00 p.m. The second suspect was Vincent Michael Torino, age 31, who operated a small boat repair business near the waterfront. Torino had been seen arguing with Catherine several weeks prior to her disappearance, though witnesses described the interaction as brief and seemingly resolved. Investigators learned that Torino had asked Catherine for a date, which she had politely declined. On the evening of November 23rd, Torino claimed to have been working alone in his shop, but no witnesses could corroborate his whereabouts between 6:00 p.m. and 8:00 p.m. However, physical evidence did not support his involvement, and investigators could establish no concrete connection between Torino and the crime scene. James Patrick Sullivan, no relation to Catherine despite the shared surname, emerged as a third suspect. Sullivan, aged 28, worked as a night watchman at several waterfront warehouses and had been seen in the area around the time of Catherine's disappearance. He had a previous arrest record for public intoxication and disturbing the peace, making him of interest to investigators. Sullivan's behavior during questioning was described as nervous and evasive, but he maintained his innocence throughout multiple interviews. His alibi was partially verified by warehouse employees who confirmed his presence at work, though there were gaps in the timeline that allowed for his potential involvement. Perhaps the most thoroughly investigated suspect was William Charles McKenna, age 42, a respected businessman who owned 3 fishing boats and employed numerous local residents. McKenna had no obvious connection to Catherine, but investigators learned that he had been experiencing financial difficulties due to poor fishing seasons and equipment failures. Some community members suggested that McKenna might have been involved in illegal activities to supplement his income, though no evidence supported these rumors. McKenna's social standing and lack of prior criminal history initially protected him from intense scrutiny, and his whereabouts on the evening in question were verified by multiple family members. The fifth and final initial suspect was David Anthony Morrison, age 39, a divorced fisherman with a reputation for heavy drinking and aggressive behavior toward women. Morrison had been involved in several domestic violence incidents with his ex-wife and was known to frequent bars in the waterfront district. On November 23rd, Morrison had been drinking at Murphy's Tavern until approximately 6:00 p.m., placing him in the general area during the relevant time frame. However, bartender testimony and witness statements indicated that Morrison was too intoxicated to have carried out a crime requiring planning and physical coordination. Each suspect was investigated thoroughly within the limitations of 1963 forensic technology. Fingerprint evidence from the crime scene was minimal due to weather conditions and the outdoor environment. The blood evidence found at the scene matched Catherine's blood type, but this was shared by approximately 35% of the population, limiting its investigative value. Without DNA analysis, advanced ballistics, or sophisticated surveillance techniques, investigators relied primarily on witness testimony, alibi verification, and circumstantial evidence. The investigation gradually lost momentum as leads were exhausted and no conclusive evidence emerged pointing to any particular suspect. Detective Lieutenant Hayes conducted follow-up interviews with all suspects and witnesses multiple times over the subsequent months, but no new information surfaced. The case officially remained active, but received decreased attention as other crimes demanded police resources. By spring 1964, the investigation had essentially stalled. The final significant activity occurred in June 1964, when investigators received an anonymous tip claiming that Catherine's body had been buried in a wooded area outside the city. An extensive search of the suggested location yielded no evidence, and the tip was ultimately determined to be false information provided by someone seeking attention rather than assisting the investigation. The case was transferred to the cold case files in September 1964, nearly 1 year after Catherine's disappearance. While technically remaining open, no active investigation continued, and the file was only occasionally reviewed when similar crimes occurred or when new witnesses came forward with information. What time is it where you're watching this? It's amazing how time can seem to stand still for grieving families while the rest of the world moves forward. The O'Sullivan family never recovered from Catherine's disappearance, though each member processed their grief differently. Patrick O'Sullivan, Catherine's father, became consumed with finding answers and spent his free time conducting his own investigation. He walked the waterfront daily, questioning anyone who might have information and following up on rumors and speculation. Patrick's obsession with the case strained his marriage and affected his work performance at the docks. "My father never stopped looking for Catherine," recalled her sister, Ruth O'Sullivan Brennan, in a 1995 interview. "Every conversation somehow came back to what might have happened to her. He would spread out newspaper clippings and police reports on the kitchen table every evening, going over the same details again and again, hoping to find something everyone else had missed." Patrick's dedication took a physical toll as well. He lost significant weight during the months following Catherine's disappearance and developed insomnia that plagued him for the rest of his life. Co-workers at the docks remember him as a changed man, someone who had lost his previous joviality and quick Irish wit. Patrick died of a heart attack in 1978, and family members believed that the stress of Catherine's unsolved case contributed to his early death at age 62. Bridget O'Sullivan channeled her grief into religious devotion and community service. She attended daily mass at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception and organized prayer groups dedicated to finding Catherine and supporting other families affected by violent crime. Bridget established a small memorial fund that provided assistance to families of missing persons, contributing money earned from her laundry work to help with search expenses and counseling services. Catherine's older brothers, Michael and Thomas, dealt with their sister's disappearance by becoming overly protective of their remaining siblings and their own families. Michael, who had planned to pursue a career in banking, instead remained in Portland to stay close to his family. He eventually became a police officer, motivated partly by his desire to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. Thomas moved to Boston shortly after Catherine's disappearance, but returned to Portland every year on the anniversary of her disappearance to participate in memorial services organized by his mother. The youngest sister, Mary, was only 16 when Catherine disappeared, and the tragedy significantly impacted her adolescent development. Mary struggled academically during her remaining high school years and battled depression throughout her 20s. She eventually found stability through marriage and motherhood, but continued to experience anxiety related to her sister's fate. "I always felt like I was living in Catherine's shadow," Mary explained in a 2003 interview. "Everyone remembered how bright and promising she was, and I felt pressure to somehow replace what the family had lost." Ruth, who was 14 at the time of Catherine's disappearance, perhaps suffered the most lasting effects. As the sibling closest in age to Catherine, Ruth had shared a bedroom and many confidences with her missing sister. Ruth later described experiencing survivor's guilt and struggled with feelings that she should have somehow prevented Catherine's disappearance. She left Portland immediately after high school graduation and did not return for over 20 years, unable to cope with the memories and unanswered questions that permeated the city. The investigation was formally reviewed 3 times during the subsequent decades, each time employing the most advanced forensic techniques available. In 1978, 15 years after Catherine's disappearance, Detective Sergeant Michael Flanagan reopened the case file and re-interviewed surviving witnesses and suspects. Several of the original suspects had died, including Vincent Michael Torino and James Patrick Sullivan, limiting the scope of the reinvestigation. The 1978 review employed improved fingerprint analysis techniques, but found no additional usable prints from the original crime scene evidence. Blood evidence was re-examined using more sophisticated testing methods, confirming that it was human blood consistent with Catherine's blood type, but still lacking the specificity that would later be provided by DNA analysis. In 1991, the case received its second major review when Detective Lieutenant Sarah McKinnon, who would eventually oversee the 2014 breakthrough, was assigned to the cold case unit. McKinnon organized all existing evidence and witness statements, creating a comprehensive database that would prove invaluable in future investigations. She also tracked down several witnesses who had never been formally interviewed by the original investigators. The third review occurred in 2003, 40 years after Catherine's disappearance, when DNA analysis had become standard in criminal investigations. Unfortunately, the blood evidence collected in 1963 had degraded significantly, and the small sample size prevented successful DNA extraction using techniques available at that time. However, the evidence was preserved with the hope that advancing technology would eventually allow for analysis. Each review generated renewed media attention and brought forward new witnesses, though none provided information that significantly advanced the investigation. The case had become part of Portland folklore, with numerous theories and speculation, but no concrete answers. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courthouse. Detective Sarah Martinez, now leading the case, methodically presented 23 pieces of physical evidence linking Harold Thornton to Margaret's murder. The most damning was a small metal button found preserved in evidence storage, which matched the unique maritime rope pattern described in Thornton's detailed diary entries about his fishing expeditions with Margaret's father. "I never suspected Harold," admitted Rebecca Collins, Margaret's childhood friend who had maintained contact with the family for decades. "He was at every memorial service, every candlelight vigil. He would approach Margaret's mother with tears in his eyes, telling her how sorry he was for their loss. Now, knowing what we know, it makes my skin crawl to think about those interactions." The forensic analysis revealed disturbing details about Thornton's methodical planning. His diary contained sketches of the rocky outcropping where Margaret's body was discovered, drawn with precise measurements and notation about tide schedules. Marine biologist Dr. James Patterson, who assisted in the evidence review, explained that Thornton's knowledge of ocean currents would have made him uniquely qualified to predict how long it would take for a body to surface. Harold understood the harbor better than anyone, Patterson noted during his testimony. His calculations about tidal patterns in his diary were remarkably accurate. He knew exactly when and where Margaret would be found, which explains why he was among the first people at the scene that October morning. The trial revealed the extent of Thornton's deception over 5 decades. Court records showed that he had received the Portland Harbor Community Service Award in 1987 for his volunteer work with troubled youth. He had served on the school board for 12 years and was a regular volunteer at St. Catherine's Church, where Margaret's family held their memorial services. Perhaps most chilling was the testimony from Margaret's younger brother, David Whitmore, now 74 and battling cancer. "Harold came to our house every year on the anniversary of Margaret's death," David testified with a trembling voice. "He would sit at our kitchen table and tell my mother how he prayed for Margaret's soul every night. My mother would make him coffee and share her memories of Margaret, never knowing she was confiding in her daughter's killer." The prosecution presented evidence that Thornton had maintained a relationship with the Whitmore family that bordered on predatory. He had attended Margaret's nephew's wedding in 1991, her niece's graduation in 2003, and had even contributed financially to a scholarship fund established in Margaret's name. Each interaction was documented through photographs found in his basement, creating a grotesque memorial to his crime. Psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Elena Rodriguez revealed classic patterns of narcissistic behavior combined with antisocial personality traits. Harold Thornton exhibits what we call duping delight, Dr. Rodriguez explained to the jury. He derived pleasure from deceiving the community and especially from his interactions with the victim's family. His diary entries show clear evidence of reliving the crime through these encounters. The diary contained entries spanning 5 decades, with detailed descriptions of his emotional state during various memorial events. One particularly disturbing entry from 1998 read, "Watched Eleanor cry today during the service. She still believes Margaret is watching over the family. If only she knew how closely I've been watching instead." As the trial progressed, more community members came forward with their own uncomfortable memories of Thornton. Patricia Newcomb, a retired teacher who had worked with him on several school committees, recalled his unusual interest in discussing Margaret's case. "He would bring her up in conversations that had nothing to do with the murder," Newcomb testified. At Christmas parties, during school board meetings, even at casual encounters at the grocery store. He seemed compelled to keep her memory alive. But now I understand it was for his own twisted satisfaction. The defense team, led by attorney Michael Brennan, struggled to present any credible alternative theory. Thornton's advanced age and declining health made him a sympathetic figure to some, but the overwhelming evidence and his own written confessions left little room for doubt. Brennan's strategy focused on questioning the authenticity of some diary entries and arguing that decades of guilt had led to false confessions, but forensic handwriting analysis confirmed the entries spanned the entire 54-year period. During his testimony, Thornton appeared detached and sometimes confused, claiming not to remember specific details about the murder itself. However, when prosecutor Jennifer Walsh read excerpts from his diary describing the crime, his demeanor changed noticeably. Court observers noted that he seemed to perk up during these readings, occasionally nodding or appearing to mouth along with certain passages. The most emotional moment of the trial came when Eleanor Whitmore's granddaughter, Sarah Mitchell, read a victim impact statement on behalf of the family. "Harold Thornton didn't just kill my great-aunt Margaret," she said through tears. "He tortured our entire family for over 50 years. He sat in our living room, shared our holiday meals, and pretended to grieve with us while knowing exactly what had happened to Margaret. The psychological damage he inflicted extends far beyond the initial crime." The forensic evidence presented painted a picture of brutal calculation. DNA analysis of preserved tissue samples confirmed Thornton's presence at the crime scene, while soil analysis matched dirt found under Margaret's fingernails to sediment from areas of the harbor where Thornton frequently moored his fishing boat. The rope fibers found on Margaret's clothing were consistent with maritime rope commonly used by fishing vessels in 1963. Detective Martinez explained to the jury how modern investigative techniques had revealed connections that were impossible to detect in 1963. We were able to establish a timeline using Harold's own fishing logs, which he meticulously maintained and which still exist in the harbour master's records, she testified. These logs show that his boat was in the exact area where Margaret's body was discovered, during the precise time window when the murder occurred. The community's reaction to the trial was complex and divided. Many long-time residents struggled to reconcile their memories of Thornton as a helpful community member with the reality of his crimes. Helen Morrison, who had lived next door to Thornton for 37 years, expressed the confusion felt by many. "He shoveled my driveway every winter, helped me carry groceries, fixed my fence after the storm in 2009. How do you process that someone who seemed so caring was capable of such evil?" The trial also revealed the broader impact of unsolved crimes on small communities. Dr. Amanda Foster, a sociologist who studies the long-term effects of cold cases, testified about the psychological toll on Portland Harbor residents. When a murder remains unsolved for decades, it creates a persistent undercurrent of fear and suspicion, she explained. People develop coping mechanisms, but the unresolved trauma affects how a community functions. The fact that the perpetrator remained among them, actively participating in their healing rituals, compounds this trauma exponentially. On November 15, 2017, after deliberating for just 4 hours, the jury found Harold Thornton guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Patricia Sullivan, in delivering the sentence, addressed the unique circumstances of the case. "Mr. Thornton, you have not only committed murder, but you have spent 5 decades compounding that crime through deliberate psychological torture of the victim's family and community. While your advanced age prevents a life sentence from carrying the weight it would have decades ago, this court ensures that you will spend your remaining years imprisoned, unable to continue the charade that has defined your adult life." Thornton, now 86 and in failing health, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He showed no visible emotion as the sentence was read, staring straight ahead with the same blank expression he had maintained throughout much of the trial. He was transferred to the Maine State Prison's medical facility, where he would require constant care due to his deteriorating health conditions. The conviction brought a measure of closure to the Whitmore family, though many members acknowledged that the decades of deception had created wounds that might never fully heal. David Whitmore, speaking outside the courthouse after the verdict, reflected on the complex emotions surrounding the resolution. "We're grateful for the truth, finally, but there's anger, too. Anger at all the years Harold stole from us, all the times he inserted himself into our grief. Margaret deserved justice 54 years ago, and we deserve to grieve without her killer manipulating our pain." The case prompted significant changes in how Maine law enforcement handles cold cases and maintains evidence storage. The success of the investigation led to the establishment of the Margaret Whitmore Cold Case Initiative, which allocated additional funding and resources to reviewing unsolved crimes using modern forensic techniques. Detective Martinez was promoted to head the new unit, which has since reopened investigations into 17 other cold cases from the same era. The Portland Harbor Community Center was renamed the Margaret Rose Whitmore Community Center in a ceremony attended by hundreds of residents. The dedication plaque reads, "In memory of Margaret Rose Whitmore, whose life was cut short, but whose spirit continues to inspire our community's commitment to justice and truth." The case also influenced police training protocols throughout Maine, with mandatory coursework on the psychological profiles of long-term offenders and the importance of considering community members as potential suspects in cold case reviews. The Thornton case is now studied in criminal justice programs as an example of how perpetrators can hide in plain sight for decades. Margaret's nephew, Thomas Whitmore, established a scholarship fund at the University of Maine's Criminal Justice Program, specifically supporting students interested in cold case investigation and forensic science. Margaret wanted to be a teacher, he explained at the fund's inaugural ceremony. She believed in the power of knowledge to change lives. This scholarship ensures that her dream of education continues to make a difference even in death. The The ripple effects of the case extended beyond Portland Harbor. Other coastal communities began reviewing their own cold cases with renewed urgency, leading to the resolution of 6 additional decades-old murders throughout New England. The success of DNA analysis in the Thornton case prompted increased funding for forensic laboratories throughout the region. Harold Thornton died in prison on March 3, 2019, 18 months after his conviction. He had never formally confessed to Margaret's murder in court, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. His death brought a final chapter to the case, though many questions about his motivations and potential other victims remained unanswered. Prison medical records indicated that he had been suffering from advanced dementia in his final months, possibly explaining his apparent confusion during the trial. The investigation into Thornton's life continued, even after his death, as authorities sought to determine whether Margaret was his only victim. A review of missing person cases and unsolved murders throughout coastal Maine during the 1960s and 1970s revealed several potential connections, though none were conclusively linked to Thornton. His death eliminated any possibility of obtaining additional confessions or clarifications about other potential crimes. The Margaret Whitmore case stands as a testament to the persistence of family members who refuse to let loved ones be forgotten, the dedication of law enforcement officers who continue working cases across decades, and the power of advancing technology to bring justice even when it seems impossible. It also serves as a sobering reminder that evil can hide behind a mask of respectability for decades, infiltrating the very communities it has wounded. For the residents of Portland Harbor, the resolution brought both relief and a profound sense of betrayal. The man they had trusted, respected, and confided in had been living among them as a killer for over half a century. The process of rebuilding trust and community cohesion continues, supported by counseling services and community healing initiatives established in the wake of the trial. Margaret Rose Whitmore, who dreamed of becoming a teacher and nurturing young minds, ultimately taught her community the most difficult lesson of all, that justice may be delayed, but it need never be denied. Her memory lives on not only in the scholarship that bears her name and the community center dedicated to her, but in the renewed commitment to seeking truth and supporting victims' families that her case inspired throughout New England and beyond.